Right, today we're going to begin studying another civilization, and that will begin with the Roman Republic. How many of you have heard the expression, all roads lead to Rome? Only a couple of you. All right, well, it's a very famous expression. And it comes from the fact that the Roman Republic and then the Empire built so many roads. This is a picture of one of them that is still around. So you can see what a great job they did. This is called the Via Appia, which means, Via means the way or road. Appia is the name of this road, and it was named after the censor, that was a British or a Roman official by the name of Appius Claudius. He was the namesake of this road because he's the one that came up with a new basis for judging a person's tax liability to raise money to build roads, and that was ownership of property. So he came up with property taxes, something we have with us to this day. His system opened up new sources of revenue for the state, and Rome used much of this money in the construction of roads. Here's a map showing all the roads across the Roman Republic and Empire, and you can see there are a lot of roads that were built, and if you took any of them, eventually you could get to Rome. Now, why was Rome so interested in building roads? What was the primary motivation?
So the troops can get places.
Exactly, it was for military purposes. Now, there are other benefits, but that was the primary reason why they built these roads. In addition to building roads, they also used the innovation of property taxes to build what are called aqueducts. Aqua, meaning water, again named after Appius Claudius. This was initially brought into building an aqueduct leading into Rome, and then they also used it other places as well. The principle of an aqueduct is that you have essentially a large pipe or tunnel coming down from the mountains into the city, and you build this at a slight incline or decline so that the water continues to flow all the way down. So when you get to a valley like this, you can't go down and up because water doesn't flow uphill. So in order to keep the same incline, they had to build all these structures to hold up the pipeline. Here's another aqueduct that was built by the Romans. Here's one that's in a modern town, still there. Many of them have survived. Now, Rome was the culmination of the ancient civilizations that were given to us through Nebuchadnezzar's statue interpreted by Daniel. And as you remember, we've studied Babylon and Media Persia, Greece, and now we're at Rome. Rome is the last of the empires. Rome also is a civilization that participates in what might be called the depths of spiritual darkness. Rome had no access to truth as it begins. But we're going to find eventually that even though there is spiritual darkness, that Rome would be the place where the cradle of Christianity is experienced. Christianity grows in Rome, in the Roman Empire. And the influence of Rome continues not only in the city of Rome, but also in the Republic of Rome, then the Empire of Rome. Roman culture is with us to this day, and the church has influence of Rome as well as having influenced Rome. Next, the beginning of Roman civilization. Let's look at the geographic features of Rome. First of all, the soil and the climate are suitable for farming. Now, even though they are close to the same latitude that we are, their climate is much warmer. And it's because of the breezes coming off the Mediterranean Sea. So they can grow a lot of things there. And they're most famous for what? What do you think of when you think of products coming out of Italy?
Bread.
Bread, so they grow wheat.
Wine.
Wine, so they grow a lot of grapes.
Pasta.
Made out of wheat.
Oh.
Pizza, made out of wheat. Cannolis, made okay. Pierogies are from somewhere else.
Oil.
What? Oil? Oil from olive trees. So they're well known for a number of different food products. The Apennine Mountains run right down through the middle of the Italian boot, as you can well recognize. The water that's nearby is called the Mediterranean Sea. The word Medi, meaning middle, and terra, land. So they viewed the Mediterranean Sea as being the water that's in the middle of all the land that's around it. This would be Europe on the north, and Africa on the south, and Asia on the east. Later, the Romans called it Mare Nostrum, which means our sea. So they viewed it as belonging to them. And certainly they did conquer all the areas around the Mediterranean. Let's look at the early inhabitants of Italy. First of all, we have the Latins who lived in this area, which is around the area of Rome. Phoenicians came into the area and established colonies in Africa, North Africa, and then also in Sicily. Phoenicians lived there. You may have heard of a small island over here called Malta. It's where the Apostle Paul was shipwrecked. You remember that? And he was carrying wood, and an asp came out, poisonous snake, and bit him. And he shook it off into the fire. It didn't affect him at all. Well, Malta was, at that time, inhabited by Phoenicians. Now, the Phoenicians are known for what? What do you remember about the Phoenicians?
Purple dye.
Purple dye. What else? They were merchants, and so that's why they had these colonies over here in the western part of the Mediterranean. They were merchants, and they established places of trade. Greeks also came over, because Greece is just over here. They came over into this area of Italy, southern Italy, and settled. In fact, they called the land the Vitalia, meaning land of cattle. And that led to the name Italy. Just take the V off and you have Italia. One of the major groups that comes into the area and influences Italy is the Etruscans. The Etruscans established one of Italy's earliest civilizations along the western coast. Now, they were also a seafaring power, originally from Africa, although most Greek and Roman historians indicate that their origin was all the way over in Lydia in Asia Minor. If that's the case, being that they were dark-skinned people, they're described as a short black race who initially populated France and Germany, whose merchant ships traded in every major port of the Mediterranean. But if they came originally from Asia Minor, you wonder whether they might not have been related to the Philistines, who also were dark-skinned people that came to inhabit the part of the land of Canaan. But at any rate, the Etruscans had a great influence upon the area. They were a formidable foe on land because of their secret weapon. What do you suppose their secret weapon was? It'll surprise you.
Cats. I heard an army defeated Egypt with cats.
Yeah, that wasn't them. Shoes. They had sturdy leather shoes. Can you imagine how that would be a secret weapon? Well, if you know, before that, people fought in their bare feet or just, some flimsy bit of leather or something on their soles of their feet. And have you ever tried to do anything outside, running around to play a game in your bare feet? What happens? Invariably, you step on something, right? And it disables you. So having sturdy shoes enabled them to be better fighters. Through most of the 6th century, one author says, 6th century BC, these allied municipalities constituted the strongest political force in Italy, with a well-organized army, a famous cavalry, and a powerful navy that for a time ruled what is still called the Tyrrhene Sea, which is the Greek word for Etruscan. So the Tyrrhene Sea is really named after them. The Tyrrhenian Sea is really the Etruscan Sea. Interesting thing about the Etruscans is how they wrote. We write left to right, correct? Which way does Hebrew go? Right to left. The Etruscans, I'm not sure which way they started, but they would start one way. Let's say you're left to right. They start writing, and when they got to the end, they would write like the ox plows. They would just turn around and come back on the next line, and then go back and forth like that. So kind of odd. To us, would be writing backwards, but they apparently were able to read it. The religion consisted of worshiping what they called the 12 great gods, some of whom kept hordes of winged demons, and included the sacrifice of sheep, bulls, and men. One author says, human victims were slaughtered or buried alive at the funerals of the great. Another author says, the Etruscan appears to have believed that for every enemy slain, he could secure the release of a soul from hell. Now later in the 16th century, people were told that if they contributed money to the church, that souls could be rescued from purgatory. But these people apparently believed the more enemies you killed, the more people you got out of hell, of your friends and relatives. Another person says that for a century, the Roman nation was ruled and formed by Etruscan civilization and power. So the Etruscans had a great influence upon even those that would come after them. All right, let's talk about the founding of Rome. On the banks of the Tiber River, 7 Latin villages made up of the tribes of the Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans formed the League of the Seven Hills. This, combining the 7 different villages together, forms the original city of Rome. Now, there's a legend about the founding of Rome, which concerns a set of twins named Romulus and Remus. Are you familiar with that story of Romulus and Remus? Just generally, what happens is Romulus and Remus are taken by their uncle out and left to die on a hillside, and a she-wolf comes along and rescues them and feeds them, and they grow up. They end up coming to this area, and they have a fight. Romulus kills Remus, and then he goes on to establish the city, which is named after him, Rome. That's the basics of the story. And it changes depending on who you're reading to. All right, let's talk about the early Roman society and government. First of all, in society. The basic unit of society for Rome was the family. And the father, or the pater, was the sole authority of the family. The father alone had any rights before the law in the early republic. He alone could buy, hold, or sell property, or make contracts. Even his wife's dowry in this period belonged to him. If his wife was accused of a crime, she was committed to him for judgment and punishment. He could condemn her to death for infidelity or for stealing the keys to his wine. Over his children, he had the power of life, death, and sale into slavery. So he could kill one of his children with immunity. They belonged to him. All that the son acquired became legally his father's property. Nor could he marry without his father's consent. A married daughter remained under her father's power unless he allowed her to marry cum manu, gave her into the hand, manu meaning hand, or power of her husband. Over his slaves, he had unlimited authority. These and his wife and children were mancipia to him, literally taken in hand. and no matter what their age or status, they remained in his power until he chose to emancipate them, to let them out of hand. That's what emancipate. Mani is hand, mansi, and emancipate means to let out of your hand. These rights of the paterfamilias were checked to some degree by custom, public opinion, the clan council, and Praetorian law. Otherwise, they lasted to his death and could not be ended by his insanity or even his own choice. Their effect was to cement the unity of the family as the basis of Roman morals and government, and to establish a discipline that hardened the Roman character into stoic strength. Now, they were harsher in letter than in practice. They didn't always do the most extreme things that they were allowed to do in the law. Most of the time they didn't. They seldom abused their power, but power was there. So strong families became one of the foundations of Rome's greatness. Now, it's important to understand the relationship between families and larger units. Families that are from a common ancestor are called a clan. A number of clans joined together would be called a tribe. There are two social classes, essentially. One is the patricians, who are the wealthy, and the aristocrats, the landowners. The second were called plebeians. Those were the common people, the farmers, the peasants, freed slaves. Now, plebeians could not hold public office, and they were not allowed to vote on laws. By 200 BC, through a lot of movement within the government and a lot of reform, they had most of the same rights as the patricians. So here's how it looks in a chart. The patricians are on top, very few of them. The plebeians are next, the large amount, and of course on the bottom, as always, slaves and freemen. The government of early Rome was a monarchy, which means what? Right. The authority of the monarchy was called the imperium. This is the word from which we get imperial or empire. The symbol of the authority was a bundle of rods enclosing an axe called the fasces. You can see the rods here bound together, and there's an axe in the midst of it sticking out. That was a symbol of authority. Whoever had that was the person in charge. Maybe you've seen a picture of this if you've ever looked at your money closely. On the back of our dime, there's a picture of the fasces indicating authority. Any questions about what we've covered so far? All right, I want to preview what you're going to be looking at next. And if you want to look at a better chart, you can look on page 277. No, I'm sorry, page 77. Page 77 in your books. I want to explain this flow chart of power in the early Roman Republic, because I think just looking at it, you're probably going to have a hard time figuring it out. So I want to go through it a little bit. Let's start with the Senate. The Senate is an aristocratic body, so it's made up of what kind of people? Patricians. They're composed of about 300 members. They held most of the power in the early Roman Republic. Now, when we talk about government, we should be familiar of what the three branches of government are. No matter what government is, there are three branches. Whether they're actually divided into three or not is another thing, but there are three functions of government. What are they? We think in our government we have the three branches separated according to our Constitution. What are the three branches of government?
Judicial.
Judicial's one. Legislative. What's the third one? What's the president?
Chief.
Representative.
Executive. All right, so we want to look at the Roman government under the early Roman Republic and see whether we can figure out where the branches fit in, the functions of government. So what would the Senate be? Legislative. All right, now, from the Senate, we can go two directions. Let's go this way first. There are two censors. That's a name, a title and office, chosen from the Senate. They serve for 18 months. Now notice what they do. They drew up official lists determining taxation, military service, and voting eligibility. All right, so what function of government would that be?
Executive.
Right, executive. Now let's move down as the flow goes down to the tribal assembly. You can see it's a popular assembly. The members were chosen from territorial districts called tribus. And they elected some government officials. So this is an attempt to involve more people in government aside from the 300 patricians. These are for people from outside areas, outside of Rome. And they are given the opportunity to elect tribunes, coming from both of these. But we'll just deal with it as it relates to the tribal assembly. 10 tribunes are elected by these assemblies. They serve for 1 year. Now they have a really strong bit of authority here, or power, and that they could veto decisions of the Senate or consuls. What's it mean to veto?
Get rid of it.
Yeah, no, it really means no. So if a law is passed by the Senate, the tribunes can say, no, that's not going to be a law. So you can see that that would be a great power. All right, let's go this way now. We have consuls, chosen from the Senate membership as well, served for 1 year. They held the imperium. They carried out laws and commanded the army. Which branch of government would that represent?
Judicial.
The judicial branch interprets the law, determines whether people are disobeying the law or not, but we don't have that here.
Executive.
That's executive again. So we have executive represented here and here. And we see that the tribunes have veto power not only over the Senate, but also over anything the consuls come up with. Now, out of the censors, then, comes this other group called the Assembly of Censors. They're a popular assembly. Members are organized by social class, and I'm not sure how many classes there were, but if you look at the plebeians, you have different kinds of people. You have merchants, you have craftsmen, so I imagine that it broke down into areas like that. And they voted by group, each group having one vote. So if you had 10 or if you had 200 people in that particular group, you only got one vote. And they elected some government officials. All right, so this chart gives you a little bit of an idea of the breakdown of government in the early Roman Republic. And you can see that there is an attempt to not allow any one group or one person to gain a lot of power. So you can see these guys only are in office for 18 months, these only for a year, and then had to change from somebody to somebody else from the Senate. And the tribunes are there to veto anything that would be bad for the popular people, the populace. And so it represents a real attempt to limit government. Katie, you have a question?
I don't know if it's supposed to be like this, but all the arrows are leading to the consuls.
Well, they come from the Senate. The tribunes have veto power over the consuls. So that's why the arrows are pointing to them. Okay, any other questions? All right, I thought that would be helpful to go over before you looked at it in your book. because I suspect that it would be hard to figure out on your own, just kind of overwhelming to look at all these arrows and everything. All right, the rest of the time we have today, I'm going to give you to work on your assignment for our next time together. And that is to read and take notes on pages 77 to 79, only a few pages. Do the questions on page 79 in complete sentences, and do it on the same paper that you did page 76. Any questions about the assignment? Yes. Tell her what I just said.
Yeah.
Yes.